truth.
Top 8 reasons there's a war in Syria. Number 1. Syria's central bank is state-owned and state-controlled, so as to serve the national economy and the Syrian people, instead of enriching the international banksters of the Western nations and Israel, who force upon almost all nations of the world usurious loans generating artificial debt crises by which these nations are enslaved. Central banks equal Rothschild's banks. Number 2. Syria has no international monetary fund debt. The IMF acts as the collection police for the international banksters. Any wise nation stays out of the IMF's clutches, which is what Syria has succeeded in doing. But the banksters are not happy at all with such wisdom. Number 3. Syria has banned genetically modified seeds, GMOs, or frankenfood because Bashar Assad wants to protect his people's health. Frankenfood means food control, which means population control. Obviously, the NWO favors frankenfood. The US imposed it on conquered Iraq. 4. Syria's population is well informed about the NWO, whose domination of the world puppet politicians by its think tanks and secret societies is openly discussed in Syria's media and universities. Such openness is anathema to the NWO, which must cover its operations in darkness. 5. Syria has massive oil and gas reserves, and it is working to exploit them independently of the giant Western oil companies like Shell and Texaco. The NWO loves oil, but not oil independence. 6. Syria clearly and unequivocally opposes Zionism in Israel. In recent years, even the base Western media has reacted to Israel's virtual turning of Palestine into a mega gulag. Syria denounces Israel's brutal apartheid. Obviously, the Jewish lobbies all around the world will unite to use their influence to put an end to such firm opposition to their fellow Jews in Israel. 7. Syria is one of the last secular Muslim states in the Middle East and refuses to recognize any superiority of the people which still claims to be the chosen people of God. The same lobbies will chastise any refusal of their religion as their racial superiority. 8. Syria proudly maintains and protects its political and cultural national identity, whereas the NWO seeks to melt down all nations except for one into a single conglomerate mass of sheeple for total control.
Society today is composed of a series of institutions. From political institutions, legal institutions, religious institutions, to institutions of social class, familial values, and occupational specialization. It is obvious the profound influence these traditionalized structures have in shaping our understandings and perspectives. Yet, of all the social institutions we are born into, directed by, and conditioned upon, there seems to be no system as taken for granted and misunderstood as the monetary system. Taking on nearly religious proportions, the established monetary institution exists as one of the most unquestioned forms of faith there is. How money is created, the policies by which it is governed, and how it truly affects society are unregistered interests of the great majority of the population. In a world where 1% of the population owns 40% of the planet's wealth, in a world where 34,000 children die every single day from poverty and preventable diseases, and where 50% of the world's population lives on less than $2 a day, one thing is clear: something is very wrong. And whether we are aware of it or not, the lifeblood of all of our established institutions, and thus society itself, is money. Therefore, understanding this institution of monetary policy is critical to understanding why our lives are the way they are. Unfortunately, economics is often viewed with confusion and boredom. Endless streams of financial jargon, coupled with intimidating mathematics, quickly deters people from attempts at understanding it. However, the fact is, the complexity associated with the financial system is a mere mask, designed to conceal one of the most socially paralyzing structures humanity has ever endured. A number of years ago, the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, produced a document entitled Modern Money Mechanics. This publication detailed the institutionalized practice of money creation as utilized by the Federal Reserve and the web of global commercial banks it supports. On the opening page, the document states its objective. The purpose of this booklet is to describe the basic process of money creation in a fractional reserve banking system. It then proceeds to describe this fractional reserve process through various banking terminology, a translation of which goes something like this. The United States government decides it needs some money, so it calls up the Federal Reserve and requests, say, $10 billion. The Fed replies, saying, sure, we'll buy $10 billion in government bonds from you. So the government takes some pieces of paper, paints some official-looking designs on them, and calls them treasury bonds. Then it puts a value on these bonds to the sum of $10 billion and sends them over to the Fed. In turn, the people at the Fed draw up a bunch of impressive pieces of paper themselves, only this time calling them Federal Reserve notes, also designating a value of $10 billion to the Fed. The Fed then takes these notes and trades them for the bonds. Once this exchange is complete, the government then takes the $10 billion in Federal Reserve notes and deposits it into a bank account. And upon this deposit, the paper notes officially become legal tender money, adding $10 billion to the U.S. money supply. And there it is. $10 billion in new money has been created. Of course, this example is a generalization, for, in reality, this transaction would occur electronically, with no paper used at all. In fact, only 3% of the U.S. money supply exists in physical currency. The other 97% essentially exists in computers alone. Now, government bonds are, by design, instruments of debt, and when the Fed purchases these bonds, with money it essentially created out of thin air, the government is actually promising to pay back that money to the Fed. In other words, the money was created out of debt. This mind-numbing paradox of how money or value can be created out of debt or a liability will become more clear as we further this exercise. So, the exchange has been made and now $10 billion sits in a commercial bank account. Here's where it gets really interesting. For as based on the fractional reserve practice, that $10 billion deposit instantly becomes part of the bank's reserves, just as all deposits do. And regarding reserve requirements, as stated in modern money mechanics, a bank must maintain legally required reserves equal to a prescribed percentage of its deposits. It then quantifies this by stating, under current regulations, the reserve requirement against most transaction accounts is 10%. This means that with a $10 billion deposit, 10% or $1 billion is held as the required reserve, while the other $9 billion is considered an excessive reserve and can be used as the basis for new loans. Now, it is logical to assume that this $9 billion is literally coming out of the existing $10 billion deposit. However, this is actually not the case. What really happens is that the $9 billion is simply created out of thin air on top of the existing $10 billion deposit. This is how the money supply is expanded. As stated in modern money mechanics, of course they, the banks, do not really pay out loans from the money they receive as deposits. If they did this, no additional money would be created. What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes, loan contracts, in exchange for credits, money, to the borrower's transaction accounts. In other words, the $9 billion can be created out of nothing simply because there is a demand for such a loan and that there is a $10 billion deposit to satisfy the reserve requirements. Now, let's assume that somebody walks into this bank and borrows the newly available $9 billion. They will then most likely take that money and deposit it into their own bank account. The process then repeats, for that deposit becomes part of the bank's reserves. 10% is isolated, and in turn 90% of the $9 billion, or $8.1 billion, is now available as newly created money for more loans. And of course, that 8.1 can be loaned out and redeposited, creating an additional 7.2 billion, to 6.5 billion, to 5.9 billion, etc. This deposit money creation loan cycle can technically go on to infinity. The average mathematical result is that about $90 billion can be created on top of the original $10 billion. In other words, for every deposit that ever occurs in the banking system, about 9 times that amount can be created out of thin air.
Money jitters. Ask the obliging Bank of America for a jar of soothing instant money, M-O-N-E-Y, in the form of a convenient personal loan.
So, now that we understand how money is created by this fractional reserve banking system, a logical yet elusive question might come to mind. What is actually giving this newly created money value? The answer? The money that already exists. The new money essentially steals value from the existing money supply. For the total pool of money is being increased irrespective to demand for goods and services. And as supply and demand finds equilibrium, prices rise, diminishing the purchasing power of each individual dollar. This is generally referred to as inflation, and inflation is essentially a hidden tax on the public.
What is the advice that you generally get? And that is, inflate the currency. They don't say debase the currency. They don't say devalue the currency. They don't say cheat the people who are saved. They say lower the interest rates. The real deception is when we distort the value of money. When we create money out of thin air, we have no savings, and yet there's so-called capital. So my question boils down to this: how in the world can we expect to solve the problems of inflation, that is, the increase in the supply of money, with more inflation?
Of course, it can't. The fractional reserve system of monetary expansion is inherently inflationary, for the act of expanding the money supply without there being a proportional expansion of goods and services in the economy will always debase a currency. In fact, a quick glance at the historical values of the US dollar versus the money supply reflects this point definitively, for the inverse relationship is obvious. $1 in 1913 required $21.60 in 2007 to match value. That is a 96% devaluation since the Federal Reserve came into existence. Now, if this reality of inherent and perpetual inflation seems absurd and economically self-defeating, hold that thought, for absurdity is an understatement in regard to how our financial system really operates. For in our financial system, money is debt, and debt is money. Here is a chart of the U.S. money supply from 1950 to 2006. Here is a chart of the U.S. national debt for the same period. How interesting it is that the trends are virtually the same. For the more money there is, the more debt there is. The more debt there is, the more money there is. To put it a different way, every single dollar in your wallet is owed to somebody by somebody. For remember, the only way the money can come into existence is from loans. Therefore, if everyone in the country were able to pay off all debts, including the government, there would not be $1 in circulation. In fact, the last time in American history the national debt was completely paid off was in 1835, after President Andrew Jackson shut down the central bank that preceded the Federal Reserve. In fact, Jackson's entire political platform essentially revolved around his commitment to shut down the central bank, stating at one point, "The bold efforts the present bank has made to control the government are but premonitions of the fate that awaits the American people, should they be deluded into a perpetuation of this institution or the establishment of another like it." Unfortunately, his message was short-lived, and the international bankers succeeded to install another central bank in 1913, the Federal Reserve. And as long as this institution exists, perpetual debt is guaranteed. Now, so far we have discussed the reality that money is created out of debt, through loans. These loans are based on a bank's reserves, and reserves are derived from deposits. And through this fractional reserve system, any one deposit can create 9 times its original value, in turn debasing the existing money supply, raising prices in society. And since all this money is created out of debt and circulated randomly through commerce, people become detached from their original debt, and a disequilibrium exists, where people are forced to compete for labor in order to pull enough money out of the money supply to cover their costs of living. As dysfunctional and backwards as all of this might seem, there is still one thing we have omitted from this equation. And it is this element of the structure which reveals the truly fraudulent nature of the system itself: the application of interest. When the government borrows money from the Fed, or when a person borrows money from a bank, it almost always has to be paid back with accrued interest. In other words, almost every single dollar that exists must be eventually returned to a bank with interest paid as well. But if all money is borrowed from the central bank and is expanded by commercial banks through loans, only what would be referred to as the principal is being created in the money supply. So then, where is the money to cover all of the interest that is charged? Nowhere. It doesn't exist. The ramifications of this are staggering, for the amount of money owed back to the banks will always exceed the amount of money that is available in circulation. This is why inflation is a constant in the economy, for new money is always needed to help cover the perpetual deficit built into the system, caused by the need to pay the interest. What this also means is that mathematically, defaults and bankruptcy are literally built into the system, and there will always be poor pockets of society that get the short end of the stick. An analogy would be a game of musical chairs, for once the music stops, somebody is left out to dry. And that's the point. It invariably transfers true wealth from the individual to the banks. For if you are unable to pay for your mortgage, they will take your property. This is particularly enraging when you realize that not only is such a default inevitable due to the fractional reserve practice, but also because of the fact that the money that the bank loaned to you didn't even legally exist in the first place. In 1969, there was a Minnesota court case involving a man named Jerome Daly, who was challenging the foreclosure of his home by the bank which provided the loan to purchase it. His argument was that the mortgage contract required both parties, being he and the bank, each put up a legitimate form of property for the exchange. In legal language, this is called consideration. Mr. Daly explained that the money was, in fact, not the property of the bank, for it was created out of nothing as soon as the loan agreement was signed. Remember what modern money mechanics stated about loans? What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes in exchange for credits. Reserves are unchanged by the loan transactions, but deposit credits constitute new additions to the total deposits of the banking system. In other words, the money doesn't come out of their existing assets. The bank is simply inventing it, putting up nothing of its own, except for a theoretical liability on paper. As the court case progressed, the bank's president, Mr. Morgan, took the stand, and in the judge's personal memorandum, he recalled that the plaintiff, bank's president, admitted that, in combination with the Federal Reserve Bank, did create the money and credit upon its books by bookkeeping entry. The money and credit first came into existence when they created it. Mr. Morgan admitted that no United States law or statute existed which gave him the right to do this. A lawful consideration must exist and be tendered to support the note. The jury found that there was no lawful consideration, and I agree. He also poetically added, only God can create something of value out of nothing. And upon this revelation, the court rejected the bank's claim for foreclosure, and Daly kept his home. The implications of this court decision are immense. For every time you borrow money from a bank, whether it is a mortgage loan or a credit card charge, the money given to you is not only counterfeit, it is an illegitimate form of consideration, and hence voids the contract to repay, for the bank never had the money as property to begin with. Unfortunately, such legal realizations are suppressed and ignored, and the game of perpetual wealth transfer and perpetual debt continues. And this brings us to the ultimate question: why? During the American Civil War, President Lincoln bypassed the high-interest loans offered by the European banks and decided to do what the Founding Fathers advocated, which was to create an independent and inherently debt-free currency. It was called the greenback. Shortly after this measure was taken, an internal document circulated between private British and American banking interests stated, "Slavery is but the owning of labor, and carries with it the care of laborers, while the European plan is that capital shall control labor by controlling wages. This can be done by controlling the money. It will not do to allow the greenback, as we cannot control that." The fractional reserve policy perpetrated by the Federal Reserve, which has spread in practice to the great majority of banks in the world, is, in fact, a system of modern slavery. Think about it. Money is created out of debt. And what do people do when they are in debt? They submit to employment to pay it off. But if money can only be created out of loans, how can society ever be debt-free? It can't. And that's the point. And it is the fear of losing assets coupled with the struggle to keep up with the perpetual debt and inflation inherent in the system, compounded by the inescapable scarcity within the money supply itself, created by the interest that can never be repaid, that keeps the wage slave in line, running on the hamster wheel with millions of others, in effect powering an empire that truly benefits only the elite at the top of the pyramid. For, at the end of the day, who are you really working for? The banks. Money is created in a bank and invariably ends up in a bank. They are the true masters, along with the corporations and governments they support. Physical slavery requires people to be housed and fed. Economic slavery requires people to feed and house themselves. It is one of the most ingenious scams for social manipulation ever created, and at its core, it is an invisible war against the population. Debt is the weapon used to conquer and enslave societies, and interest is its prime ammunition. And as the majority walks around oblivious to this reality, the banks, in collusion with governments and corporations, continue to perfect and expand their tactics of economic warfare, spawning new bases, such as the World Bank and International Monetary Fund.
control of a nation's wealth, and I care not who makes the laws." This famous quotation on the seemingly one-sided relationship between banking institutions and governments is attributed to Mayer Amschel Boer Rothschild, the founder of the most notorious financial family in the world. The apparent lack of concern for democracy has led to the Rothschilds being accused of everything, from orchestrating assassinations to enabling genocide, all in the name of profit. But can one family of financiers really wield that much power today? Can the Rothschilds truly rule the world? The Rothschild family's net worth is estimated to be as high as $400 billion, but because this is spread throughout their many holdings, they never appear on rich lists. As a result, they have largely remained out of the spotlight and have become prime targets for conspiracy theorists. The story of the Rothschilds' supposed bid for power originates in 19th century England. In 1815, Nathan Rothschild, the son of the founder Mayer Rothschild, is alleged to have seized control of the Bank of England. He did this by causing market panic in the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Waterloo, and by buying the bonds that panicked people dumped. This move made Nathan the single largest creditor to the British government, effectively handing control of currency regulation and the Bank of England to a single family. If control of the money really does equate to control of the nation, that would make the Rothschild family overlords of the largest empire the world has ever known. But since then, the British Empire has crumbled, and even the Bank of England itself was nationalised in 1946. So what power, if any, does the family still wield? Well, the Bank of England is far from the only national bank to have been influenced by the Rothschilds. According to the controversial theorist Andrew Hitchcock, the Rothschilds were at the forefront of every attempt in the United States to gain control of the national economy. In 1832, Andrew Jackson ran for a second term on the basis of regaining control of the economy from the Second Bank of America, which is under Rothschild control. Upon his election victory, Jackson began to make good on his promise, removing state deposits from the Second Bank of America and refusing to renew its charter. What followed, according to Hitchcock, was a high-stakes game, with the Rothschilds causing a depression and ordering a failed assassination attempt on Jackson. In fact, Jackson remarked to his vice president, Martin Van Buren, "The bank, Mr. Van Buren, is trying to kill me." Abraham Lincoln continued to undermine Rothschild interests in 1861 by printing debt-free money to fund the Civil War and continuing to argue for restraining the influence of the central bank. Andrew Hitchcock argues that in 1865 the family arranged for his successful assassination. Finally, in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed into being the Federal Reserve, a privately owned corporation responsible for handling one of the largest economies in the world. And one of the largest shareholders in this vital company was the Rothschilds. In January 2015, The Economist published an edition predicting what was likely to happen in the forthcoming year. However, author Richard Sauder quickly identified the cover as a veiled Rothschild warning to the world of their intentions. According to Sauder, François Hollande is being gazed at by an out-of-place strange woman in an odd headdress. He says this is a threat by the Rothschilds against France. Merely a few days after it was published, on January the 7th, two brothers carried out an attack against the offices of satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris. Sauder says that the following issue of Charlie Hebdo was printed at premises owned by Liberation, a Parisian newspaper that had been bought out only a month prior by Edouard de Rothschild, who profited greatly from the 7 million print run. The implication is that the Rothschilds are willing to sacrifice innocence in the pursuit of money. But skeptics have long dismissed these theories as, at best, wild speculation, and at worst, rabid anti-Semitism. The Rothschild family spread themselves across Europe and America to develop their businesses, and as a consequence have incurred a great deal of attention. So perhaps it isn't surprising that theorists continue to accuse the secretive family of all kinds of machinations, with little evidence. All the same, their influence cannot be ignored. The current head of the Rothschild family is Sir Evelyn de Rothschild, who is worth $20 billion, and is financial advisor to the largest landholder on Earth, Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain.
Let's say the United States needs money. Instead of issuing their own United States notes backed by their own credit, they issue treasury bonds. They then sell these bonds to the Federal Reserve, which buys them with money they created out of thin air. The money that the Fed created then goes to the U.S. The U.S. then pays interest on the money that the Fed lent to the Treasury. So to clarify, the Fed creates money from nothing, loans that money to the U.S., and then charges interest on that money. What this means is that there is never and will never be enough money in circulation or in existence to pay back that debt. We as a country, as well as private citizens, are forever enslaved by debt with no way of ever paying it off. Now, when the Federal Reserve buys bonds on Wall Street, the major financial firms that have been selected as dealers deposit the proceeds at their own banks. Fed rules require banks to keep 10% of their deposits in reserves, but the bank is free to issue loans equal to the remaining 90%. Let's say the Federal Reserve buys a $1,000 bond. After putting away 10% into their reserves, they are then able to loan out 90%, or $900. Since the original $1,000 is still on deposit, the $900 in loan proceeds is more new money, money created out of nothing. A total of $1,900 of new money is now available in the economy. Now the person that took the $900 loan spends that money. The payee then deposits the $900 into their bank account, and once again, reserves and deposits increase. This process goes on until that original $1,000 bond, which was created from nothing, becomes $10,000, making this one full-fledged debt machine while also devaluing the dollar. The more money that is out in the economy, the more the value decreases. There's no wonder that since the implementation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the dollar has lost over 95% of its value. The US dollar will eventually be destroyed due to an overwhelming financial crisis, and a globalist-run monetary authority will come along to save the day. And much like the Fed pretends that its goal is to prevent another Great Depression, the global currency will pledge to prevent another financial crisis, thus putting more power into the hands of a few and enslaving humanity that much more.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no secret is revealed. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind.
Thank you for watching Now You See TV. I'm your host, John Pounders, and as always, I want to say thank you to my subscribers. In this video, I will be exposing Puppet Master #1 so we can see their puppets for what they really are. Before you lose a friend over who you're going to vote for in this presidential nomination, there are some things that you probably need to know. All these men that you see here are puppets. They do what they're told by people who control the world. If they don't, they'll be killed. So don't waste your time arguing with your friends and family over who would make the best president. There are plenty of people that get paid to be political commentators. You're not getting paid, so it's not worth the loss. I'll be doing a series of Puppet Master videos because there are so many webs of secret societies and people that I cannot do it all in one video. Puppet Master number 1, and I'm not calling him Puppet Master number 1 because he's the main Puppet Master or his family is the main Puppet Master, or this family in particular, but because they are the first family I'm going to cover. The Rothschild family. I'm not going to go into their entire family history. There are many documentaries and books that do that, and I will put links in my description for those of you who want to get into their family history. Here are some eerie words by Gudel Schnapper Rothschild. Forgive me if I don't pronounce that name right. If my sons did not want wars, there would be none. The first documentable evidence of Rothschild involvement in financial affairs of the United States came in the late 1820s and early 1830s when the family, through their agent Nicholas Biddle, fought to defeat Andrew Jackson's move to curtail the international bankers. The Rothschilds lost the first round when in 1832 President Jackson vetoed the move to renew the charters of the Bank of the United States, which is a central bank controlled by the international bankers. In 1836, the bank went out of business. Here are some quotes about the Rothschilds by some of our politicians in the past. President Andrew Jackson, the only one of the presidents whose administration totally abolished the national debt, condemned international bankers as a den of vipers, which he was determined to rout out of the fabric of American life. Jackson claimed that if only the American people understood how these vipers operated on the American scene, there would be a revolution before morning. Congressman Louis T. McFadden, who for more than 10 years served as chairman of the Banking and Currency Committee, stated that the international bankers are a dark crew of financial pirates who would cut a man's throat to get a dollar out of his pocket. They prey upon the people of the United States. After all this, finally in 1913, they slithered their way in with a number of calculated tactics, threats, war, funding. After all that, in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was fraudulently pushed through Congress. Congressman Charles Lindbergh stated, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power proven to exist by the money trust investigation will be legalized. The new law will create inflation whenever the trust wants inflation. From now on, depression will be scientifically created." In the decades that followed, it became apparent that in order to achieve their goal of world domination, they would have to instigate a series of world wars which would result in leveling of the old world in preparation for the construction of the New World Order. This plan was outlined in graphic detail by Albert Pike, the sovereign grand commander of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry and the top illuminist in America. In a letter to Giuseppe Mazzini, dated in August 15, 1871, Pike stated that the First World War was to be fomented in order to destroy Tsarist Russia and to place the vast land under the direct control of Illuminati agents. Russia was then to be used as a bogeyman to further the aims of the Illuminati worldwide. World War II was to be fomented through manipulation of the differences that existed between the German nationalists and the political Zionists. This was to result in expansion of Russian influence and the establishment of the State of Israel in Palestine. The Third World War was planned to form the differences stirred up by the Illuminati agents between the Zionists and the Arabs. The conflict was planned to spread worldwide. The Illuminati said the letter planned to unleash the nihilists and atheists and provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism. origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass, anxious for an idea, but without knowledge where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universe manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view of manifestation, which will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquer and exterminate at the same time. The Illuminati plan for world conquest, referred to by Albert Pike, was a diabolical masterpiece of Luciferian ingenuity that would take the lives of hundreds of millions of human beings and cost hundreds of billions of dollars in its accomplishment. Now let's take a look at some of the stuff they're doing today and how they got there. Victor Rothschild, who worked for J.P. Morgan & Co., was an important part of MI5 British intelligence. Victor Rothschild was also a communist and member of the Apostles Club at Cambridge. Lord Rothschild was one of the original members of the Rhodes Round Table, which developed into the Council of Foreign Relations. It was the Rothschilds who had financed Cecil Rhodes beginning in Africa. The Rothschilds had several agents with their money who got started and still served them well, the Morgans and the Rockefellers. The original Rockefellers made his money selling narcotics. It wasn't illegal back then. After acquiring a little capital, he branched out in oil. But it was the Rothschilds' capital that made the Rockefellers so powerful. They also financed the activities of Edward Harriman Railroads and the Andrew Carnegie Steel. According to one source, it was estimated that they controlled half the wealth of the world. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York was controlled by 5 banks, which owned 53% of its stocks. These 5 banks were controlled by Nathan Rothschild and Sons of London. Control over the U.S. Fed is basically controlled over the world's money. Anyone else might be taken to court for making their business sound like they are government, not the Rothschilds. It is important for them to operate the name Federal because by way of MI6 via the CIA, they instruct the U.S. government. Senators are brought and paid off by their system, as investigators of the BCCI are discovering. The Rothschilds have been intimately involved in witchcraft and the Illuminati since its early known origins. The Rothschilds are only one of the 13 controlling families. We will get to more of them in part 2. Keep in mind that Satan himself is at the top. The 13 families are only one branch of the army of darkness who is going to institute the New World Order. This is part 2 of Puppet Masters Exposed. The person I'm going to be talking about right now, most of you have never even heard of, but he is very rich, very powerful, and influences politics with billions of dollars. His name is George Soros. He has ties to over 30 major news organizations and donates large amounts of money to progress the New World Order. Just so you can see for yourself what kind of man he is, here are some of his quotes. It is sort of a disease when you consider yourself some kind of god, the creator of everything, but I feel comfortable about it now since I began to live it out. I admit that I have always harbored an exaggerated view of my self-importance. To put it bluntly, I fancied myself as some kind of god or an economic reformer like Keynes, each with his general theory, or even better, a scientist like Einstein. Reflexivity sounds like relativity. If truth be known, I carried some rather potent messianic fantasies with me from childhood, which I felt I had to control. Otherwise, I might end up in the loony bin. But when I made my way into the world, I wanted to indulge myself in my fantasies to the extent I could afford. As you can see, this guy's rather full of himself. And he has the money to back up his thoughts, so he thinks that he is some kind of god. He thinks it is his job to control the world and how it works. Like I stated in my previous video, a lot of people are arguing about presidents. Who is going to be the president? Who should be the president? Who's the best man for the job? If they're not puppets by the time they reach inauguration, they will be assassinated. Soros has been identified as a frontman of the Anglo-French Rothschilds banking group. And of course, neither he nor the Rothschilds want this fact to be public, but there are many connections to be made between these two. In Soros, the unauthorized biography, pages 5 and 6. As September 15th wore on, George Soros's confidence that Britain would pull the pound out of the ERM was growing. It had been Stanley Druckenmiller who had thought the time right for making a bet against the sterling. He talked to Soros about doing something. Soros gave him the green light, but urged his head trader to bet an even larger sum than Druckenmiller had in mind. And so Druckenmiller, acting for Soros, sold $10 billion worth of sterling. The next morning at 7 o'clock, the phone rang at Soros' home. It was Stan Druckenmiller with news. While George Soros had slept, he racked a profit of $958 million. When Soros' gains from the other positions he took during the ERM crisis were tallied, he racked up close to $2 billion. It was this bet, this single act of placing $10 billion on the fact that Britain would have to devalue the pound, that made George Soros world famous. In Time magazine, September 1st, 1997, Soros said of this event, "I had no platform, so I deliberately did the sterling thing to create a platform." In 1997, during the Asian financial crisis, the then Malaysian Prime Minister, Mahathir bin Mohamad, accused him of bringing down the Malaysian currency. In Thailand, he was branded an economic war criminal who sucks the blood from the people. It's clear to see that George Soros is a major player. He's a 64-year-old Hungarian with an American passport that is devaluing currencies all across the world. His progressive ideology is being forced on the American people. This 64-year-old senior citizen that is not even from our country provided at least $33 million in a single year to radical leftist groups orchestrating protests and unrest in Ferguson, Missouri and nationwide, according to an explosive investigation into filings of globalist financiers' philanthropic tax-exempt open society foundations. Dozens of Soros-funded outfits help lobby the media, bust in AstroTurf protesters and community organizers, coordinate propaganda message, create an echo chamber, and more, the Washington Times revealed. So can you believe this? He's not even a citizen of our country, and he's bussing in protesters, organizers, and we all know what happened in Ferguson. It was a violent mess, complete chaos. He's a race baiter, and he's trying to cause civil unrest in our country. And people don't see this. All they see is black this, white this, Jew this, Muslim this. These people are causing this to happen. They're propaganda all over the place, and people don't realize that they're falling for this propaganda. When you watch CNN, when you watch Fox, when you watch all these companies, George Soros has his hand in almost every single one of them. Okay, and not only him, all these elitists have their hands in these media organizations. It's nothing but propaganda. They're feeding the information that you see. If you can watch these propaganda organizations and keep in mind what they're trying to do, you might be alright. If not, it's best to turn it off. Quit watching it. It's their form of control. He dumps billions of dollars into these fake grassroots companies that he just makes up to fit his agenda. Grassroots companies normally operate in a way that the citizens have a problem and they try to solve it through a grassroots organization. What he's doing is he's paying to operate a grassroots organization and paying the members to do the job that he wants to have done. It would be like if I wanted to lower the cost of ice cream. So I funded a grassroots organization and made it their goal to lower the cost of ice cream, while I sit back and have no involvement other than a donation. This is the same way that the Nazis accomplished many of their goals. George Soros is nothing more than a Nazi. He's a man that pushes propaganda, invests his money where he thinks he can make a difference and lead toward his globalization goal of the New World Order. A few other events that have happened that link George Soros to him are the Occupy Wall Street and the turmoil in Ukraine. He gives more than $1.8 million to radio stations like NPR. So those of you that are listening to NPR, you are listening to the agenda of a 64-year-old non-resident of the United States. You're listening to the propaganda of a New World Order elitist. So I suggest that you find a new radio station. Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Soros's birth nation, stated that he has to deal with tens of thousands of second and third world immigrants streaming into his country and other European nations, while Soros lives free of such inconveniences in his $10 million mansion outside of New York City. Soros himself is responsible for many of the migrant problems in Europe. He is basically destroying Europe for his own gain. There's a common divide and a common double standard with these elitists. They want the borders to be shut down and allow immigrants in everywhere, but yet they themselves would not have that. They live in $10 million castles and even bigger, while the regular people like us are being infiltrated by violent criminals and terrorists because of their policies. One thing that we need to remember in all of this is that all of this is ordained by our Creator Yahovah to happen. Even though they are acting out the plans of the New World Order and are doing so evilly, they are still playing their part. The Bible says that the kings conspire against him, but he laughs. In the end, they will be defeated. Yeshua, or Jesus, will come back and he will claim his throne on the earth. And all of these people will hide in terror. They will be scared because there's nowhere to run from his face. They may sit in their lofty mansions right now, but we know that in the end, the power will be given unto our King, and he in turn will make us rulers of the new kingdom. So don't be scared. Don't worry. The Bible says to fear no man, to only fear Yahovah. So we don't fear these guys, we expose them. And the reason we expose them is so you will not fall for their tricks, so you won't be counted amongst the deceived. It's important that if you have not done this, you accept Yeshua as your Lord and Savior, and repent of all the wicked things you have done and turn to him for guidance, because he's the only one that will be able to save us from the evil that is to come. These elitists don't care about you. In fact, they want you dead. They want to cause a World War III and depopulate so much of the earth so that they can have it all to themselves. So now's the time. Don't wait. Thank you guys for watching Now You See TV. And I want you guys to know that I love you very much. Otherwise, I would not be doing these videos. Thank you.
It is my opinion that you do not really understand the concept of banking. All the banks are broke. Bank Santander, Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, they're all broke. And why are they broke? It isn't an act of God. It isn't some sort of tsunami. They're broke because we have a system called fractional reserve banking, which means that banks can lend money that they don't actually have. It's a criminal scandal, and it's been going on for too long. To add to that problem, you have moral hazard, a very significant moral hazard from the political sphere. And most of the problem starts in politics and central banks, which are part of the same political system. We have counterfeiting, sometimes called quantitative easing, but counterfeiting by any other name. The artificial printing of money, which if any ordinary person did, they'd go to prison for a very long time. And yet governments and central banks do it all the time. Central banks repress the amount of interest that rates are, so we don't have the real cost of money, and yet we blame the real retail banks for manipulating LIBOR. The sheer effrontery of this is quite astonishing. It's central banks that manipulate interest rates, Commissioner. And plus, underneath all this, we talk loosely, in a rather cavalier fashion, do we not, about deposit guarantees. So when banks go broke through their own incompetence and chicanery, the taxpayer picks up the tab. It's theft from the taxpayer. And until we start sending bankers, and I include central bankers and politicians, to prison for this outrage, it will continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Chairman Bernanke. I am very pleased to be here today as the ranking member, and in the midst of the great optimism of monetary policy and how the economy is doing, I still have some concerns. And of course, one of my long-term goals has always been to emphasize maintaining the integrity of the monetary unit rather than looking superficially at some of our statistics. But I also share the concern of the chairman of the committee of our responsibilities for oversight and your interest as well, Chairman Bernanke, on having the transparency that I think we all desire. Transparency in monetary policy is a goal we should all support. I've often wondered why Congress has so willingly given up this prerogative over monetary policy. Congress, in essence, has ceded total control of the value of our money to a secretive central bank. Congress created the Federal Reserve, yet it had no constitutional authority to do so. We forget that those powers not explicitly granted to the Congress by the Constitution are inherently denied to the Congress, and thus the authority to establish a central bank was never given. Of course, Jefferson and Hamilton had that debate early on, and the debate seemingly was settled in 1913. But transparency and oversight are something else, and they're worth considering. Congress, although not by law, essentially has given up all its oversight responsibilities over the Fed. There are no true audits. Congress knows nothing of the conversations, the plans, and the action taken in concert with other central banks. We get less and less information regarding the money supply each year, especially now that we don't even have access to M3 statistics. The role the Fed plays in the President's secretive working group on financial markets goes essentially unnoticed by Congress. The Federal Reserve shows no willingness to inform Congress voluntarily about how often the working group meets, what action it takes that affects the financial markets, or why it takes these actions. But all these actions directed by the Federal Reserve alter the purchasing power of our money. And that purchasing power is always reduced. The dollar today is worth only 4 cents compared to the dollar that the Federal Reserve started with in 1913. This has significant consequences on our economy and our political stability. All paper currencies are vulnerable to collapse, and history is replete with examples of great suffering caused by these collapses, especially to the nation's poor and the middle class. This can lead to political turmoil as well. Even before a currency collapses, the damage done by a fiat system is significant. Our monetary system insidiously transfers wealth from the poor and the middle class to the privileged rich. Wages never keep up with profits on Wall Street and the banks, thus sowing the seeds of class and discontent. When economic trouble hits, free markets and free trade are often blamed, while the harmful effects of a fiat monetary system are ignored. We deceive ourselves that all is well with the economy and ignore the fundamental flaws that are a source of growing discontent among the various groups. Few understand that our consumption and apparent wealth is dependent on a current account deficit running at approximately $800 billion a year. This deficit shows that much of our prosperity is based on borrowing rather than a true increase in production. Statistics show year after year that our productive manufacturing jobs I think they finally cut me off. Is it on now? Okay. This phenomenon is not seen as a consequence of the international fiat monetary system where the United States government benefits as the issuer of the world reserve currency. Government officials consistently claim that inflation is in check at barely 2%, but middle-class Americans know that their purchasing power, especially when it comes to housing, energy, and medical care and school tuition, is shrinking much faster than at 2% per year. Even if prices are held in check, in spite of our monetary inflation, concentrating on the CPI statistics distracts from the real issue. We must address the important consequences of the Fed manipulation of interest rates. When interest rates are artificially low, below market rates, insidious malinvestment and excessive indebtedness inevitably brings about the economic downturns that everyone dreads. We look at GDP figures and reassure ourselves that all is well, yet a growing number of Americans still do not enjoy the high standard of living that monetary inflation brings to the privileged few. Those who benefit the most are the ones who get to use the newly created credit first.
The gentleman's time has expired. If the gentleman would come to a conclusion.
Okay, I will yield back.
Not underestimate the power of the Rothschilds. Not only are they in money, in gold mining in South Africa, they've got all kind of corporations.
What is your view of the Freemasonry and the Illuminati? How do they fit into the picture?
Well, the Illuminati are the Rothschilds. You look at the Knesset and the Supreme Court building. These two buildings in Israel were built by the Rothschilds. Now, the Supreme Court building has Illuminati symbols all over the place.
What is the role of the non-Jews in the elites? I mean.
What is the role? Okay, you have your Gentiles called the Rockefellers. Now, they are tied in intimately with the Rothschilds. Rockefellers and the Rothschilds work very closely together, and this began in the late 1800s when Rockefeller had Standard Oil, and the Rothschilds were just getting into the oil business in the Caucasus with Baku oil, and they were competitors. But then Rothschild, who's the conniver, he found a way to unite with the Rockefellers. So they were no longer competitors. So this is when the Rockefeller-Rothschild connection began, in the late 1800s. And it was all about oil, and it was all about big international worldwide money. So you have these two Gentile. You have the Gentile Rockefeller and you have the Jew Rothschilds working together for money. So wherever you see Gentiles hooked in with the Jews, it's all about money. J.P. Morgan, he works also very closely with the Rothschilds and in their bank. And you see the Federal Reserve is funding his takeover of this bank that he just bought. I forget the name of it. But they work together.
All the Hollywood stars that seem to have a piece of the action, how do they fit in? Do you have a theory about that?
Well, anybody in Hollywood is owned by Jews. Jews run Hollywood. Everyone knows that. So Oprah's beholden to Jews. So if you want to get ahead in as a movie star or a television figure, you've got to kowtow to the Jews. It's the same with a politician.
I want you to be perfectly clear. I mean, I'm born Jewish, and I know my family's Jewish, and they don't know anything about this scheme, about the New World Order. They think people who talk about it are crazy. And I think that's true of what percentage of Jews are aware of this agenda. I mean, there may be this collective guilt for Christ, but is there this collective guilt for this agenda? Wouldn't you say it's only insofar as they support the agenda?
I'll tell you what every Jew does know. Every Jew knows that the Jews run the media. We all know it. I knew it growing up. We all know that Jews run Hollywood. And before I became a Christian, I used to tell my friends, hey, you want to get the biased propaganda? Go to a movie.
The Rothschilds bought Reuters in the 1800s. Reuters then bought the Associated Press, which selects and delivers the same news stories to the entire world, day after day. They have controlling interest in 3 major television networks and easily avoid media attention since they own it. Until recently, they owned and operated England's Royal Mint and continue to be the gold agent for the Bank of England, which they also direct. They also fix the world price of gold on a daily basis and profit from its ups and downs. Over the centuries, the Rothschilds have amassed trillions of dollars worth of gold bullion in their subterranean vaults and have cornered the world's gold supply. They own controlling interest in the world's largest oil company, Royal Dutch Shell. They operate phony charities and offshore banking services where the wealth of the black nobility in the Vatican is hidden in secret accounts at Rothschild Swiss banks, trusts, and holding companies. Although Evelyn Rothschild looks like a harmless gray-haired old man, make no mistake about it, Rothschild and his ancestors have handpicked presidents, crashed stock markets, bankrupted nations, orchestrated wars, and sponsored the mass murder and impoverishment of millions. With British Prime Minister Lloyd George up against a wall, Lionel Rothschild and the Jewish Zionists offered the British a deal they couldn't refuse. "We'll bring the United States into the war as your ally and win the war for you," they said, "if you'll promise us Palestine." In April of 1917, President Wilson got the green light and declared war on Germany. In return, the British government wrote the famous Balfour Declaration and addressed it to none other than Lord Lionel Rothschild. The declaration promised Palestine and Israel to the Rothschild Zionists.
In 1817, Lord Allenby conquered the Holy Land, and the Jews were promised a national home in Palestine by the Earl of Balfour, a policy endorsed by Woodrow Wilson and by the League of Nations, which made Palestine a British mandate.
That is something that the people in the United States have never been told. They never knew why we went into World War I. The Balfour Declaration was merely Great Britain's promise to pay the Zionists what they had agreed upon as a consideration for getting the United States into the war. When the war was ended, and the Germans went to Paris, to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, when they were cutting up Germany and parceling out Europe to all these nations that claimed a right to a certain part of European territory, the Jews said, "How about Palestine for us?" And they produced, for the first time, to the knowledge of Germans, this Balfour Declaration. So the Germans, for the first time, realized, oh, that was the game. That's why the United States came into the war. And the Germans, for the first time, realized that they were defeated. They suffered this terrific reparations that was slapped onto them because the Zionists wanted Palestine. And they were determined to get it at any cost. When the Germans realized this, they naturally resented it. Up to that time, the Jews had never been better off in any country in the world than they had been in Germany. The Jews were doing very well in Germany. No question about that. Now, the Germans felt, well, that was quite a sellout. We've been so nice to them, and from 1905 on, when the first communist revolution in Russia failed, and the Jews had to scramble out of Russia, they all went to Germany, and Germany gave them refuge, and they were treated very nicely. And here, they sold Germany down the river for no reason at all, other than they wanted Palestine as a so-called Jewish common.
I have joining me today Dr. and Rabbi Marvin Antelman. Welcome to the show, Rabbi.
Thank you very much for having me here. First of all, let me say this. There are a lot of conspiracy theories out there. I'm not interested in theories. I'm interested in facts. So the scholarship over the years that I've utilized are sources that are impeccable. A man by the name of Shabbatai Tzvi, who was born in 1626 and died in 1676, came along and said, I am the Messiah. and he had a tremendous following. When it was realized that his following was so great, there would be problems, the Sultan gave Shabtai a choice. Either you die or convert to Islam. So he converted. Now, there were about 1 million followers prior to the conversion. When the conversion happened, then there was disillusionment among the Jews. But there were some diehard people who set up different cults of Shabtai Tzvi. And the worst one of them was called the Domeh, which was a secret organization. And the Domeh was based in Turkey and in Salonika. And the Domeh gave rise to these terrible orgies that went on, which became part of the immorality theology of Shabtai Tzvi, corrupted later on. He apostatized himself 10 years before his death. So when he died in 1676, he had these cults doing all kinds of evil.
And the reason that these followers of Shabtai Tzvi were doing evil was because what?
Here's the thing. The Talmud says that the Messiah would come when everybody's good or everybody's bad. There is such a saying in the Talmud. So the Sabbateans said like this: it's impossible for everybody to be good, it's easy to be bad. So they turned around the Torah and they said, if you do an evil deed, then you will use up the energy of the universe, and it'll collapse, and you'll force the Messiah to come because you will have used up all the evil in the world. So whenever they engage in an orgy, they would make a bracha, and every day they would figure out a way to do as many sins as possible. Like if you eat chaylev, you're chayav karet. In other words, if you eat fat, according to the Torah, you're to be excommunicated from your people. So they would eat fat that was prohibited, non-kosher fat, from a kosher animal, which is chaylev, which is in that category, like eating blood from a kosher animal.
So they would dafka do the opposite.
They do the opposite
in order to hasten the
coming of the Messiah. After Shabtai Tzvi died, one of the most powerful Sabbatian cults, as they were called, was a transformation of the Domeh, the most extreme cult, to Europe through an insidious person by the name of Jacob Frank. He died in 1791. Now the Frankists started to spread and take over entire communities and make them satanic. And you can actually trace a line historically, which I do in my book, to the CFR from Shabtai Tzvi, and another organization called the Illuminati, which was founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. And they were involved also in the French Revolution, which is also well documented.
So what you're saying is that there really does exist a new world order, that it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy.
Right, and Professor Katz wrote a book called The Jews and Freemasonry, which gives a history of the interface between Jews and some of the cults that derived out of Shabtai Tzvi. But the next big cult that came from Shabtai Tzvi after the Domeh organization, which is in Turkey, the next big cult were the Frankists, as I mentioned with Jacob Frank. So Jacob Frank, the Vad Arba Ratzah, the Council of Four Lands, wanted to deal with Frank, and they decided to have a big excommunication on the 20th of Sivan 250 years ago. And there they made the following rulings. They said everybody that is a Frankist is to be excommunicated.
From the Jewish people?
From the Jewish people, bastards to the 10th generation, is what it said. And they prohibited people, because the Frankists were into Kabbalah, they prohibited the study of Kabbalah until you were 30 or 40 years old and you had a belly full, as they said, full of Talmud. Only then could you study the Kabbalah.
Right.
And they said they're women or whores, and they're hereby excommunicated from our people to the 10th generation.
This is what the Council of Four Lands labeled the Frankists, right, because they so deviated from Judaism and all that Judaism holds to be true and righteous. These people went off and made basically their own deformed religion, and so the Jews wanted nothing to do with them. They kicked them out.
That is correct.
Okay. Are there non-Jews that joined this Sabbatian cult?
No, non-Jews did not join the Sabbatian cult, but the non-Jews did join the Illuminati.
New World Order, Mr. Rothschild?
What?
New World Order? Depopulation?
Oh, listen, who are you...
Genocide?
Who are you televising for?
Rockefellers, come back. We don't want your New World Order, you know? Leave Chile right now. Leave Chile. You are not... You're killing a lot of people! You're killing a lot of people! Leave here! Leave Chile right now! Leave Chile! Leave Chile! We don't want your world government! Leave Chile right now! Leave Chile, okay? Leave Chile! Your family is the most disgusting in the world, you know? Leave here! Leave! Leave! You also, you're a traitor to Chile! Mr. Agustino, you're a traitor to Chile, okay? You're a traitor to Chile! What you're doing right now, okay? 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 You know everything. You know everything. You're participating with him. You're participating with him in this. Your world government will fail, okay? Will fail! Your world government will fail! Will fail! Will fail! You know it! Leave Chile right now! We don't want you here! We don't want your disgusting thing here! Leave Chile now!
We just want to let you know the New World Order has no legitimacy. And that we as a people are not afraid, and we are waking up to the robber barons and the big banksters who are looting this economy with the Federal Reserve.
Well,
what do you, I mean, the Rothschilds family did start the Federal, you know, they divided Europe first, took over Europe, the Napoleon.
Don't exaggerate.
it's the same old story of the rich guys creating something that'll be good for them and not so good for all of us.
In 1910, Senator Nelson Aldrich summoned New York's most powerful bankers to an island off the coast of Georgia to secretly negotiate plans for an American central bank. Traveling under false names in a private railroad car, the great secrecy of this expedition would foster conspiracy theories for decades to come.
The Federal Reserve is not actually a lending operation. It's a fiat printing press. It is an illegal monopoly on the power to counterfeit fiat paper as US dollars. It is an unconstitutional and therefore illegal monopoly on the power to counterfeit money into existence. A power that has of course been unconstitutionally granted to the bank's owners by the traitors in Congress. The reason this is all true is because the bank does not possess the money that it lends, but simply counterfeits it out of thin air. Tell me, how do you lend to others that which you do not actually possess yourself to lend?
The Federal Reserve has the power to create money. If you or I run the printing press in our basement, we're counterfeiters. When the Federal Reserve runs the printing press, the electronic printing press, it's monetary policy.
Here's the thing about the Federal Reserve. It's not federal, and there is no reserve. Every dollar in existence is owed to someone else, and not only that, but all the money in circulation is owed back to the Fed with interest. The problem with that is the money to pay the interest doesn't exist. It's never been created. This means that the Federal Reserve System is not only designed to keep us down, but also to keep us going down. The value of the dollar has been declining since the establishment of this fraudulent monetary system in 1913.
And by 1971, it was clear the dollar could no longer be exchanged into gold. Finally, President Nixon, in front of a television camera, bumping, I think, Gunsmoke off the air. It was bonanza.
Bonanza will be shown after a special report from NBC News.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
For the first time in history, the dollar was just a piece of paper, backed only by faith in the Federal Reserve and its policies. Over the next decade, the cost of living more than doubled. The dollar lost more than half its value.
So, what's going on here? Why does the Constitution clearly state that our money shall be coined, yet we are using government-issued, supposedly official, paper dollar bills, and we can't even redeem these for silver any longer? And why does Thomas Jefferson, the very man who drafted the Declaration of Independence and co-authored the U.S. Constitution, warn us about banks and corporations? Something is off here.
The notion of a central bank does not fit into the Constitution. The Congress has the authority to coin money, and only gold and silver should be legal tender. And this is an absolute contradiction of the Constitution to have a Federal Reserve System and a central bank.
Do you feel that our paper currency should still be backed by gold or silver?
I'm not really sure what you mean. Like change the color of our money or something, or?
It was designed for the elite, and even today a lot of people don't quite understand that.
The Federal Reserve System, to most people, seems like it is an agency of the federal government. That's what I thought it was when I first started to research this topic. But it turns out that it's nothing of the kind. The Federal Reserve is a hybrid organization. It's a partnership between the federal government and the private banks. When you look at it deeper than that, its essence is neither as a government agency or a private company. In reality, it is a cartel. In other words, it's no different in essence than a banana cartel or a sugar cartel or an oil cartel. It's a grouping of the large private corporations in the field, banking, who have come together to create agreement between themselves to limit competition, to preserve their profits, and to make sure that no newcomers come in and take away their position. That's what cartels are always designed to do. And it's a shocking thing to realize that something as prestigious as the Federal Reserve System, at its core, is nothing more or less than a banking cartel with exactly those same objectives.
We have a statute that doesn't square with the Constitution. It's void. It is not a law, in fact. So the question then arises, well, how does that square with the oath of office of representatives, senators, judges? And the answer is it doesn't. That when they come face to face with a statute that is contradiction of the Constitution, they are to treat the Constitution as the supreme law and treat that statute as void. So that's number one. Here we have a system, the Federal Reserve System, that has all of these constitutional problems, and everyone is essentially looking in the opposite direction. So that doesn't square with the oath of office. And one would think that the president, being the head of the executive department, in which we find the Treasury, Department of Treasury, right, which interacts quite closely with the Federal Reserve, might have something direct to say about that. And then, of course, the president has a specific constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and the supreme law of the land is the Constitution. So you would expect, on top of all of this, that he would be saying, wait a minute, if the Constitution doesn't square with the Federal Reserve Act in one or more ways, then I should be giving directives to the Secretary of the Treasury to take certain kinds of action to deal with that. And, of course, we see exactly the opposite.
I don't think it's good policy for the president or a president-elect to second-guess the Fed, which is an independent body.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
What should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
What the relationships are don't frankly matter. The Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
Today's paper currency, far from the gold and silver coinage stipulated by the founders, is essentially created out of thin air.
Most people are alarmed when they hear about the fact that the Fed can create money out of nothing and charge interest on it, so they don't have the money to repay the loan. So what do? Easy. Borrow some more. So this process goes on and on and on, and that's why we have the national debt growing and growing and growing. But we have to pay more for a bag of groceries today than we did 5 years ago. Comes out of our pocket, comes out of our earning capacity. That is value which we should have, but it's been taken from us through a process that we call inflation, but in reality it's a hidden tax. Inflation is the result of being able to create money out of nothing, and that is the power we have given to the Federal Reserve System.
Looking at this chart, it doesn't take a genius to see where we are headed. And when this system crashes and burns, from the ashes will emerge the New World Order. This has been the plan all along. Set up a system, get us to be dependent on it, then by the time it inevitably fails, they will present the solution, the final solution. Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new order for the ages.
Where this graph is headed is for total destruction of our monetary system. Our money will be totally worthless, and it'll probably be reissued in the form of some international currency, which will be equally worthless. But the value to these people is that once it's on an international basis, there's nowhere else to go. Right now, if you don't like American dollars, you can buy Japanese yen. If you don't like that, you can buy Swiss francs. If you don't like that, you can move to whatever currency seems to be having a little better track record. Once there's an international monetary system in place, modeled completely and exactly after the Federal Reserve System, is exactly the same, then there's no place else to go, folks.
The New World Order is exactly what it says. A single order for the entire world to live under. One authority to answer to. A one world police force, a unified world military, and one kind of currency for everyone. They even want to implement a one world religion. Just do a quick search for the United Religions Initiative, which states that it's a global grassroots interfaith network that cultivates peace and justice by engaging people to bridge religious and cultural differences and work together for the good of their communities and the world. And that's the thing, they make it sound good. Peace, justice, unity, community improvement. What's not to like? Well, they don't tell you the rest of the story. They fail to mention the part about a worldwide conspiracy being orchestrated by an extremely powerful and influential group of genetically related individuals, at least at the highest echelons, which include many of the world's wealthiest people, top political leaders, powerful Jews, and corporate elite, as well as members of secret societies including Freemasons.
Freemasons run the country!
And the so-called black nobility of Europe, dominated by the British Crown, whose goal is to create a one-world government, stripped of nationalistic and regional boundaries, that is obedient to their agenda. Their intention is to obtain complete and total control over every human being on Earth and to dramatically reduce the world's population while regulating and managing reproduction thereafter.
Folks, there is a new world order that's being created.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order. It is a big idea, a new world order. Such is a world worthy of our children's future. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. And that's why I wanted to speak to you today about the new world taking shape around us, about the prospects for a new world order now within our reach. I'll be talking in some detail about the possibility of a new world order, the quest for the new world order. New world order. The new world order really is a tool for addressing a new world of possibilities.
The President, George Bush, has talked time and time again about a new world order.
So it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
A new world order, a defining moment in history. New world order, new world order, new world order. Is that a new world order? True new world order.
Build a new world order, new world order.
I've told you before, because I love it so much, they also created the Great Seal of the United States. And that Great Seal of the United States has on it, Novus Order Seclorum, a new order for the centuries, for the ages, forever.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
Creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
What it really is putting the American economy under international regulation. Yep. And those people who have been yelling, oh, the UN's going to take over global
conspiracy
government.
Theorists.
They've been crazy, but now they're right.
Those conspiracy people had said and suggested that for years. Right. You're not wrong.
International regulation of the financial institutions, which is going to happen under the IMF control.
Now, I risk sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but it's no longer a theory. What I'm about to say is fact. The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret. They have planned and are now leading us into a one-world communist government. The combining of national governments started with the European Union. That union started with trade agreements, then a common currency, the euro, and now a European Parliament that is feverishly passing laws that override the laws of the member nations. A constitution was drafted but rejected by a few of those nations, but never mind. They implemented it anyway. Now it's North America's turn. Building on the North American Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA section of the Commerce Department is busy drafting laws and regulations for a North American Union, a union of Canada, America, and Mexico. The President has attended secret meetings and signed at least 2 agreements under the Security and Prosperity Partnership Program.
Today we must develop federal structures on a global level to deal with world problems. We need a system of enforceable world law, a democratic federal world government.
On the outskirts of the national capital today, black limousines with darkened windows converged on a hotel where private security guards imposed ironclad control. The limos carried royalty, political power brokers, and industrial titans to a secret meeting that will last all weekend. It's known as the Bilderberg Group. Could their objective be world domination?
It is impossible not to reach the conclusion that the non-reporting of these events is anything other than a conspiracy between the organisers and the media. It merely confirms the belief of many that the hidden agenda and purpose of the Bilderberg Group is to bring about undemocratic world government. It's a disgrace that the European Commission is colluding in that.
CFR members include America's wealthiest tycoons, as well as the highly placed elite in government, academic institutions, tax-exempt foundations, and the establishment media. Ruling Class Journalists, written by Richard Harwood, describes the CFR membership as the ruling establishment in the United States. The Washington Post article boasted that news reporters who are CFR members do not merely analyze and interpret foreign policy for the United States, they help make it. Who are these policymakers? Many of their faces are familiar. NBC's Tom Brokaw, CBS's Dan Rather, ABC's Barbara Walters, Jim Lehrer of PBS, William F. Buckley of National Review, media mogul Rupert Murdoch, owner of the giant multifaceted News Corporation. These media heavyweights, and many others like them, are members of the CFR. Powerful corporations are also invited to become members. At the close of the 20th century, CFR influence presided over far-reaching consolidations of media control. In 1995, CFR members Michael Eisner of Disney and ABC's Thomas Murphy merged their media empires. Soon after the merger, the Disney-ABC empire becomes a CFR corporate member. In the year 2000, the world's largest internet service provider, America Online, joins forces with Time Warner, one of the world's largest news organizations. The CEOs favoring the move are CNN's Thomas Johnson and Time Warner's Gerald Levin, both CFR members. Once again, another media giant is created under the shadow of CFR influence. Today, an elite handful of individuals define the agendas that are supported by the empire of establishment news.
What sort of a financial deal should Obama be seeking to strike when he travels to China next month?
No, I think this would be the time, because you really need to bring China into the creation of a new world order, financial world order. They are kind of reluctant members of the IMF. They play along, but they don't make much of a contribution. So I think you need a new world order that China has to be part of the process of creating it.
While the name New World Order is a term frequently used today when referring to this group, it's more useful to identify the principal organizations, institutions, and individuals who make up this vast interlocking spiderweb of elite conspirators. The Illuminati is the oldest term commonly used to refer to the 13 bloodline families and their offshoots that make up a major portion of this controlling elite. Most members of the Illuminati are also members in the highest ranks of numerous secretive and occult societies, which in many cases extend straight back into the ancient world. The upper levels of this tightly compartmentalized Illuminati structural pyramid include planning committees and organizations that the public has little or no knowledge of at all. The upper levels of the Illuminati pyramid include secretive committees with names such as the Council of Three, the Council of Five, the Council of Seven, the Council of Nine, the Council of 13, the Council of 33, the Grand Druid Council, the Committee of 300, also called the Olympians, and the Committee of 500, among others. In 1992, Dr. John Coleman published Conspirators' Hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300, where he summarizes the intent and purpose of the Committee of 300 as follows.
A one-world government and one-unit monetary system, under permanent non-elected hereditary oligarchists who self-select from among their numbers in the form of a feudal system as it was in the Middle Ages. In this one-world entity, population will be limited by restrictions on the number of children per family, diseases, wars, famines, until 1 billion people who are useful to the ruling class, in areas which will be strictly and clearly defined, remain as the total world population. There will be no middle class, only rulers and the servants. All laws will be uniform under a legal system of world courts practicing the same unified code of laws, backed up by a one-world government police force and a one-world unified military to enforce laws in all former countries where no national boundaries shall exist. The system will be on the basis of a welfare state. Those who are obedient and subservient to the one-world government will be rewarded with the means to live. Those who are rebellious will simply be starved to death or be declared outlaws, thus a target for anyone who wishes to kill them. Privately owned firearms or weapons of any kind will be prohibited.
The sheer magnitude and complex web of deceit surrounding the individuals and organizations involved in this conspiracy is mind-boggling. Most people react with disbelief and skepticism towards the topic, unaware that they have been conditioned to act that way by the institutional and media influences that were created by the mother of all mind control organizations, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. It's in London. What most people believe to be public opinion is, in reality, carefully crafted and scripted propaganda designed to elicit a desired behavioral response from the public. Mind control is a much greater problem than most people realize. According to Cisco Wheeler, a former Illuminati mind control programmer, there are 10 million people who have been programmed as mind-controlled slaves using trauma-based mind control programs with names like Project Monarch and MK Ultra. The newer non-trauma electronic means of mind control programming that grew out of the Montauk Project may include millions more. Al Bellick, who played a principal role in the development of the Montauk Project, said that there are likely 10 million victims of the Montauk-style mind control programming worldwide, with the majority located in the USA. He also said that there are covert Montauk programming centers in every major city in the US. After seeing what I've seen in my lifetime and doing a few years of research, it's hard for me to doubt these claims. Also, I recommend a documentary called The Montauk Chronicles. You'll gain a much clearer understanding of mind control programs. In fact, I encourage research of everything that we've gone over here today. I could go on for days about the New World Order. There's just so much to it, and not to mention all the things happening now that are taking us straight there. False flag operations, shooting hoaxes, perpetual wars, mass media propaganda from the 6 corporations that own everything you see, hear, and read, an education system destined for failure, presidents that are selected, not elected, GMOs and other terrible ingredients like high fructose corn syrup, MSG, and artificial sweeteners that get placed in most of the food supply, vaccines and the countless prescription drugs that the pharmaceutical industry floods us with. So many people are all messed up from this stuff. Behind all these things are the same perpetrators, banksters and Illuminati gangsters. Their goal is to make our world extremely unbearable and chaotic so that they can offer the ultimate solution and fully implement the New World Order.
I start from the supposition that the world is topsy-turvy, that things are all wrong, that the wrong people are in jail and the wrong people are out of jail, that the wrong people are in power and the wrong people are out of power, that the wealth is distributed in this country and the world in such a way as not simply to require small reform, but to require a drastic reallocation of wealth. I start from the supposition that we don't have to say too much about this because all we have to do is think about the state of the world today and realize that things are all upside down. Now, if you don't think, if you just listen to TV and read scholarly things, you actually begin to think that things are not so bad, or that just little things are wrong. But you have to get a little detached and then come back and look at the world, and you are horrified. So we have to start from that supposition that things are really topsy-turvy. And our topic is topsy-turvy, civil disobedience. Now, as soon as you say the topic is civil disobedience, you're saying our problem is civil disobedience. That is not our problem. Our problem is civil obedience. Our problem is the numbers of people all over the world who have obeyed the dictates of the leaders of their government and have gone to war. And millions have been killed because of this obedience. We recognize this for Nazi Germany. We know that the problem there was obedience, that the people obeyed Hitler. People obeyed. That was wrong. They should have challenged, and they should have resisted. And if we were only there, we would have showed them. Even in Stalin's Russia, we can understand that. People are obedient. All these herd-like people. Remember those bad old days when people were exploited by feudalism? Everything was terrible in the Middle Ages. But now we have Western civilization, the rule of law. The rule of law has regularized and maximized the injustice that existed before the rule of law. That is what the rule of law has done. When in all the nations of the world, the rule of law is the darling of the leaders and the plague of the people, we ought to begin to recognize this. We have to transcend these national boundaries in our thinking. Nixon and Brezhnev have much more in common with one another than we have with Nixon. J. Edgar Hoover has far more in common with the head of the Soviet secret police than he has with us. It's the international dedication to law and order that binds the leaders of all countries in a comradely bond. That's why we're always so surprised when they get together. They smile, they shake hands, they smoke cigars. They really like one another, no matter what they say. What we are trying to do, I assume, is really to get back to the principles and aims and spirit of the Declaration of Independence. This spirit is resistance to illegitimate authority and to forces that deprive people of their life and liberty and right to pursue happiness. And therefore, under these conditions, it urges the right to alter or abolish their current form of government, and the stress had been on abolish. But to establish the principles of the Declaration of Independence, we're going to need to go outside the law, to stop obeying the laws that demand killing or that allocate wealth the way it's been done, or that put people in jail for petty technical offenses and keep other people out of jail for enormous crimes. My hope is that this kind of spirit will take place not just in this country, but in other countries, because they all need it. People in all countries need the spirit of disobedience to the state, which is not a metaphysical thing, but a thing of force and wealth. And we need a kind of declaration of interdependence among people in all countries of the world who are striving for the same thing.
Sometimes you can sit down and talk to the devil and he'll make a lot of sense. He can really get philosophical. He can get technical. Oh, he can get religious. The devil has a lot of things to say. When you stop listening to God, that's when you start listening to Satan. Amen. And I certainly believe in a personal devil. Now, you may say, well, now, preacher, the devil doesn't bother me anymore. Well, I'm glad you got there. I'm not quite there yet. I don't know how you got there, and I don't know where you are. But believe me, he still bothers me. You're going to have to make a choice. You've got to decide today, which one am I going to serve? I want you to remember something. That Bible says that there are fiery darts from the devil. These are darts, these are arrows that he fires at you, and he's firing them constantly. And the only thing that can keep them from penetrating your soul is the full armor of God, the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, amen. Your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace, the sword of the Spirit, amen. When you stand firm in that armor of God and say, Satan, I am not what you say I am what God says I am. And I know whom I have believed, and I'm persuaded, amen. Amen. I'm persuaded he's able to keep that which I've committed to him. Against that day, you better believe that the war is a war, my friend. It's not a game. We war, but we don't war after the flesh. We war after the Spirit, and the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they're mighty unto God to the pulling down of strongholds. So maybe while I'm preaching to you right now, Satan is working your mind over. He's filling your mind full of filthy thoughts. It doesn't help if you spent last week in front of a computer watching pornography. That's not going to help you. If you're buying little girly magazines and spending your time looking at this stuff, my friend, don't be surprised if it doesn't suck the very life out of your soul. Make a choice today. Are you going to choose life, or will you choose death? We all make that decision, and we make it every day of our lives. And it'd be a good thing if you told the Lord every breath you took, every day of your life, Lord, my life is in your hands. My heart beats because you tell it to beat. I live because you tell me to live. I exist because you exist. I am what I am by the grace of God. Hallelujah. If you do that, you might be surprised at how that kind of thinking will affect your life.
Oh,